To me, brand is really the inherent value of the brand name and eliciting that value exchange and that response that's outside of the functionality of the product itself.
Welcome to Contrary to Popular Opinion, a podcast hosted by Vujade Digital. In each episode, we bring you provocative topics and novel perspectives around leadership, business, and marketing that defy the norms because exponential growth demands unconventional thinking and visionary action. So open your mind and let's get into this week's episode.
Today, we're going to talk about correlation models, things like that we often talk about, and we often are trying to problem solve around how in the world do we prove spending $1 on media actually does something for a brand or a service and creates an impact that is somehow a measured signal of a consumer doing something that we want them to do. So we often talk about correlation, Kelly. We have talked about in the past, can talk more about today, using tools like media mix modeling technologies or other sort of correlation models. I think this is partially prompted by some recent headwinds we're running into. We've got some advertisers who are having some issues around pixel tracking on their websites and the idea of privacy and consumers not wanting to be tracked. And that seems to be complicating things even more because the less we can track, the less we can correlate, right? So I'm going to pick your brain today and ask you to talk a little bit more about how you like to form ideas and concepts and models using correlation or media mix modeling or other signals that we sometimes have available and sometimes don't. So why don't we start off talking about just correlation in general? When you're thinking about a new project or a client, product or service, and you're trying to think about, okay, I have to spend $1. I have to put an ad out there. What are all the signals that are going to be available that are going to allow me to correlate that action to some business impact? Like at a macro level, like where does your head go?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting topic. I think it's core to the fundamentals of what we do as a business. You know, whenever this topic comes up, it brings up the old adage that everyone kind of refers to in our industry, where I forget, I think it was Ogilvy or one of the godfathers of advertising that kind of said, you know, I know 50% of my marketing doesn't work. I just don't know which 50%. And that's always sort of the cliche that comes up on that. And I think the idea of correlation modeling really makes me think about the ebbs and the flows of the business that we're in and the promises that have come and gone and the technologies that have come and gone and the data availabilities that come and gone where, you know, we've gone into this world of I can tell you exactly step by step the journey that someone goes through to data privacy, taking all of that away and understanding everything from last click attribution to first touch to algorithmic models of all of the credit giving and all of those things in the process and to the Facebooks. And all of these are just different ways that everyone's trying to scramble to justify the relationship between, to your point, when I spend $1, when I make an investment to what we've talked about in the past, which is ultimately what advertising is, generating exposure to a few seconds of a story or a narrative or a message that is meant to land and create an impact and a behavioral influence to get someone to ultimately do something that they wouldn't have done had they never been exposed to that. And developing a relationship between spending money on creating that opportunity, creating that communication channel to that behavior, and then that behavior ultimately resulting in some kind of ROI, some kind of a business outcome. Now, what we have to factor in there is all kinds of businesses and products have different life cycles and different journeys to them. Some things are as simple and as impulse purchase oriented of I saw a Facebook ad, I clicked on it and I bought it. And that's a very short journey. It's pretty easy to say, okay, saw an ad, clicked on it, made a purchase. Very short connective tissue. You can really see, okay, 1 to 1 equals 2. I know that ad ultimately got me a sale. Most things, especially nowadays, aren't as simple as that. They don't flow in that short of steps and that short of journeys with individual influence on that user's journey. So you have to start to look at it in, okay, well, what if you have to start looking at things in a funnel where you can't just say, you've never heard of my brand or my product. I'm simply going to serve you an ad and you're going to buy it in a short time frame. Now, if you think about a funnel being something where I need you to first, maybe I even need to point out the fact that you have a need or a challenge. You may not even be actively suffering or aware of or acutely aware of your problem so that you know that you need a solution, so that you know that my brand exists, so that you know that I make something that will solve your problem, so that you know how to buy it. So as a brand, I might have to invest in you even factoring in like, oh, I didn't realize that my deodorant might be not good for me environmentally. I'm not even thinking about that. I might, as a brand, need to invest in you even having that light bulb moment of, oh, I should think about a different type of deodorant than what I just take for granted. Now I'm open to new things of, well, now I know that's a problem. So now I need to know that this brand solves that problem. Well, okay, well, this brand does it. Okay, and this brand has this product, and this product is sold in Target, and this product is cheaper or more expensive and better, or my friends like it. So you start to think about how long those journeys and all the different touch points that go into when and why someone buys or takes an action. And then if you throw in the whole other world of business decisions that are larger with more decision makers and groups making decisions and how many influences you have to have there, it highlights the need to understand I can't always just track, see an ad, interact with an ad, come to an outcome. That's where the idea of correlation and mixed media modeling comes into play, where you have to start to be able to look at large data sets of investments and exposures and presence and correlate it to steps along the journey and digital signals that produces and potentially offline signals and all of the things that indicate movement along the path or the journey to an outcome and start to look at when I do X, I see an impact in Y. And do I have a long enough history and a long enough data to create baselines that allow me to think if I do more of X, I will get more of Y? Or maybe it's a combination of X, Y, and Z that turns into this outcome and starting to move the needle. And that's what you start to look at with large enough data sets and enough algorithmic and intelligent math and regression modeling to understand what relationship in investments have with outcomes when it's not as clear as that initial path. You may know that if I make commercial or TV investments 12 months ahead of time, then eventually I will grow my awareness and my knowledge base and my user pool to get my ROI at the end of the year come holiday shopping when everyone's making decisions. And again, you have to think about the journey. So that's ultimately where the idea and the need for correlation comes in is when you need to look at bigger pictures with more noise and more variables and longer journeys, it's not always as simple as what does Facebook tell me my ROAS is on click ads to sell shoes or something like that.
Fair enough. Some of the things that I tend to come across a lot is whether or not correlation and causation end up being in the same place or that they're not, right? Like that they're maybe those two things are conflicting, right? That correlation doesn't necessarily always mean causation, and that, maybe even things like media mix modeling can't identify some of that stuff. So when you think about correlating all these signals and things that we're doing in a marketplace or a marketer's, putting out there in marketing, and then you have to really sort of get down to like, is it correlation? Is causation intertwined in that? Do you draw a distinction somewhere? Is there some line where you draw a distinction between correlation and causation in your mind about how media sort of impacts things? Because that's a real challenge, right? There is an unknowable variable about what we do that's just impossible to know. So it's hard to know, is correlation and causation, are they one and the same, or are they two different things?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the idea of confidence levels comes in, and this is where the length of historical data and the direction that it indicates the likely outcomes are, right? It's not as simple as you don't just run a media mix model one time, come up with a X equaled Y, and that's it. It is an ongoing foundational thing where you're constantly ingesting, you're constantly learning that model, and it's getting smarter over time where it sees those relationships and the needles moving and what the outcomes are. And at the end of the day, the outcomes of it are predictive. They are predictive with degrees of confidence of likely what did lead to something or what could happen if you did things. But in a perfect world, if you're setting these systems up properly, you are generating a level of confidence in what historically impacted the data that you've got so that it can tell you what to do next. And all that that means is it's helping guide you on where to spend your dollars, where to get optimized, where to get more efficient. And then you have to go and make that actionable. And I actually think that this is where the deployment of mixed media models and other correlation models generally falls short more often than not. Is it is often used as an informative tool versus a predictive and actionable tool that drives you forward. Most people will say, I'm using it to prove myself and be able to say, look, I drove X and Y. You should be really happy with what I did. Versus, yes, it's really great that it's validating that we made good decisions and we had nice outcomes and that we had a role to play in it and it didn't just happen or it wouldn't have just happened on its own. But more importantly, what can you extract and learn from it, and what can you do next in order to lean into the good and the bad that it's coming out with? And you're not always going to be perfect with it, but as long as you're following that guidance, as long as you understand how to deploy, you should spend more in this platform. You should deploy this level of frequency, this channel, this combination of exposures tends to lead to better outcomes. And then, what's the point of diminishing returns? How much more could I invest before that starts to fall flat? As long as you are looking at it to inform that guidance and that forward looking, it is this evolving process that you get to. And so none of it's perfect. We don't know, had you completely removed those ads, would 100% of it not gotten there. But what these models can be very good at is it can start to show you what it does believe the non-media driven baseline, the if you stop spending today, what is likely to continue to happen anyway, versus what is marketing driven as a whole, and then what components are the most efficient at driving the best outcomes on that. And again, it's guidance. It is levels of confidence that the data says is likely true. But again, it's the breakdown of data and where to go with it. And even on the part where it says, if you stop spending everything today, this is your baseline customer base that just knows about you and is going to come back to you organically. It can't really tell you, does that last for 3 months, 6 months, a year? Like when does that start to wither and die down? And what's the halo effect there? But what it does is it paints this picture of indicating as I make decisions and as I make investments, I am seeing data come in and it's making use of that. And it's not just the platforms trying everything they can to take as much credit and show the best ROI and ROAS. I mean, that's self-graded homework from Google and Facebook and all these things. They want to take credit for I played a role in every single sale. They want, obviously, the more results they show they drove, the more you're going to spend on their platforms. And so you really start to get this self-graded homework from them where they're trying really hard to work ways to make it look as good as possible. So having another layer that's looking sort of agnostically as a whole from the layer on top and not just looking at the one-to-one ad equal this equal that, but really when we see at scale and in large sets, what's the movement? It's a really nice second layer that helps guide that and understand it. And a lot of times it is very much, how big is my market? How much more could I be doing? What am I leaving on the table before I might reach my ceiling and have to pivot back and make more of a brand decision or more of an investment in a different way that would give me an opportunity beyond just what's sitting in front of me right now?
What is, in this case, media mix modeling, not marketing mix modeling, but in our particular field of work, media mix modeling. So, Kelly, today I'm going to pick your brain about that.
Really quick, yeah, before you go into that, I think one point of clarification as we go through is, so media mix modeling, marketing mix modeling, MMM, again, is something, when I look at it, it's kind of a catch-all term for essentially correlation analysis, right? Being able to look at the relationships, the trends, and the predictiveness of one thing leading to another, and the strength of confidence that they are tied to each other, or causation and correlation and all of that. So because it can get confusing, and this happens in other areas where there's mixed media modeling as a description of a way to do that, but it's really just the correlation or the relationships between metrics, outcomes, efforts, all of that.
Well, thank you for defining for the audience that that is how we look at it, probably how it should be looked at, because there is a lot of slang language and acronyms in our field of work. So we'll table set with that MMM is sort of this broad sort of label, but it really sort of all ladders down to a very specific practice of interpretation of things. Okay, so you talk about a lot of the parts and pieces that are needed. Paint the picture of a brand journey for me to answer the question of when does it become worth it to invest in the effort that it takes? And is there a point where you're too small before that starts? So think of it this way. You started a brand, in your case, a soccer equipment accessory manufacturing brand. So you make balls and jerseys and gloves and shin guards and all this kind of cool stuff. And you just launched and you've got this state-of-the-art technology that's making the best products because of the best materials ever. But you just started the company and you don't have enough data to train it, but you've got a lot of money. Talk about when, where, and how the ability to actually use it works. You talk about training. So you probably can't do it as a startup company, right? Because you have to have a lot of data. You might not be able to do it because you don't have enough money. Like what are the moments when a brand should be thinking about, okay, now I have what it takes, data, money, time, resources, whatever, in order to implement something like this so that I will get consistent, accurate, trend-worthy information that I can make decisions off of. When does that moment happen?
I think it's a unique answer to right now versus what my answer to this would have been maybe even like a year ago. And a lot of that is done with AI tools right now and what it's allowing for. I think the question is better broken up into the scale of correlation modeling that I would access. Because with AI and the tools that are in there right now, I would argue that you can start to look at it in this frame of reference and frame of mind pretty much right now without major costs or investments if you have the right mindset or skill set or the right people working on your business. That's kind of a different thing to go into. But the ability to kind of look at the patterns and relationships between moving parts can be done pretty well within the systems that happen right now. But that's a very loose, informal way of doing it. That's just a matter of cleaning up your own data and your own media things right now. That's something that I do for our clients a lot right now. There is a next phase of that, which would have been the full answer I would have given, say, a year ago before some of this, which is a true invested, tool-based, data science-driven, real full fidelity mixed media model that costs with that. The answer to that would be when the outcomes and the information at that full investment are, I would say, maybe 5 to 10% of what my total spend is. I wouldn't have so much. I wouldn't spend 6 figures plus on a really baked in mixed media model until I was spending at least 10 times that much, so that whatever I was learning and informing and predicting and growing was really going to be leveraged and yield kind of the outcomes from that. And so if I'm spending $1 million more, there may be a reason to start to kind of look at, okay, I want to make sure I'm spending that. And if I have ambitions to grow that $1 million to 2 or 3 or 4, and to know kind of what those maximized returns are, then it starts to create a good balance of what it can guide me to do. Because again, there's so many different things that you can spend the next dollar in marketing on. And as much as I hate to say it, like the answer isn't always another dollar into Facebook or another dollar into search. It might be more money into better creative or a promo or a discount or a PR thing. There's all kinds of things that work together to create outcomes. And when you're just measuring things like platform-driven CPAs or click-through rates or those things like that, you can get so focused on the efficiency of a single channel, you can kind of lose the forest for the trees and understanding how one thing, maybe search is incredible, right? Search has always benefited from being like the last touch, the last thing that people do. And so it's always looked really good. But we've always made the joke about, well, how do you know someone would have either done that search or clicked on your result If they didn't see your CTV ad leading into it, it recognized your brand before it. That's a really hard thing to know and measure, and it's historically been really hard. Well, mixed media modeling, really done well, can start to show the balance of things that are upper and middle funnel and how they lead into and grow into the bottom funnel that have always taken credit. And so when I get to a stage where I'm activating multiple channels and I have multiple things that influence my user journey, and I need to understand how they all work in conjunction to each other, that's when I would get really, really serious about making those types of investments to have that visibility. And I absolutely would put it into place if I had a business where my marketing team had to make this case to leadership and a CFO or a board who tends to not really buy into the marketing impacts of things. The ability to kind of really show that data and that correlation and that forecasting is a big overcoming of that barrier of convincing people, if you give me more money, I have mathematically backed and statistically strength relevance that shows you will get more than what you give me back in returns. And that becomes really powerful.
So I'm going to pick on what you just said a little bit in the industry. I would say we're a small agency, so we don't come across the big brands, but let's say the small to mid-market size brands that are spending 1 to 20 million annually in media. I would argue, based on what I've seen, 25% or less of those brands with budgets of that size are deploying anything like this, because when we encounter them, most of them don't have this. So why do you think that is? Well, how could you be spending 5, 10, 15, or $20 million a year in media, but not have a sophisticated mathematical model to help adjust decision logic to where things contribute? Or you said correlation, contribution, those kinds of things. Like, if, first of all, do you agree that it's a much less percentage of people using it than are using it? Would you agree to that?
I would absolutely agree to that. And I would take it one step further. And I would say the smaller majority of the ones that are probably are not doing it either right or as effectively as they should be, because there's a lot of problems on that front that I could get into as well.
We know that because we've taken over some of those. But that being said, if that's the case, if you're a marketer and you knew that the data science is good enough now, that and the cost of the tools and the resources to implement are reasonable if you're spending 10 or $20 million a year in media, why would you not have this in place?
It's hard. It's hard, and you have to pay for it. It takes time. Let's say, for example, I'll simplify it out. Let's say you ran search, social, and programmatic at an equal level, and you spent an average of $100,000 a month per channel, per tactic, going back over time. If you only had the data for 2 out of those 3 channels, you're going to have a huge blind spot on something that could have been moving the reality around that the model can't account for. And so it might be giving you inaccurate or unreliable outcomes because it has too big of a blind spot to account for it. Now, again, the fact that it's blind and consistent doesn't render it useless, but it limits its overall value by having that blind spot. So you need to be able to have that data available for the most important, impactful things that likely contribute to those outcomes. Because without that, you can come to the wrong conclusions in the models. And that's where it becomes difficult. Because if a brand has been working, let's say a brand went with 3 different agencies over the course of the last 3 years, right? Every one of those agencies that they were working with likely ran different channels, maybe they didn't even own the accounts, so they don't have the data. They named them differently. They used different tactics. And so now you don't even own that historical data because you've moved around partners and no one tends to remember to collect and store all that in a really useful way. And so again, your worst case scenario is if you don't have that, you can start from scratch from day one, but now you have to work with all your partners with a clean vision, a clean structure, so that everything moving forward is consistent and you're building your own history to increase the confidence over time as it does that pattern recognition.
All right, so here's the tougher part B of that question. Let's say you have all of that because you've been spending a good sum of money on paid media.
Or you want to start from scratch. Either way, let's say you want to do it, but yeah.
No, in this case, I want to say, let's say you have all that. You're the marketing director for a brand that's spending $5 million annually in paid media. you don't have a media mix modeling tool or license or the skilled labor to process and manage and run something like that, how are you making decisions on where to invest media dollars in the absence of that?
I mean, it just tends to be channel by channel and individual. It tends to be based on whatever your meta metrics are, or your search keyword research and your share of voice and your CPAs or your cost per clicks or whatever platform specific information is being given to you. It tends to be a very siloed approach in that case, where it's I'm maximizing this channel and I'm getting this channel and I'm running this channel, versus being able to look at the bigger picture and how they all sort of ebb and flow together. That's what I would think would be the norm if you don't have sort of that broader kind of higher level of visibility on it. I'm careful in making that statement ubiquitously, because mixed media model is not the only way to not silo your media execution, but I would say it doesn't tell as much of a story on a lot of those variabilities.
Strategy and brand. And there's always been a debate on brand and this idea that, well, brand doesn't sell. It's just a signal. It just creates a signal of awareness or a consideration, but it doesn't sell. And then there's the other opinion that brand is everything, because as a consumer, if you don't align with, and I think this might be the altruistic thinking that marketers have, if you don't align with the brand and their values and what their purpose is and what they stand for, who cares? You just want to know, does it solve a problem you have, and is it cheap? So I think the question here is, if we believe or don't believe that brand sells, and do we believe consumers, or do you believe consumers actually align with brand? Like, does it matter? Or does product and price and solution matter more than brand? And do marketers just sort of wish consumers cared about brand? I just, for the record, will state, I think brand is an incredibly powerful, important thing, but I might be that generation that was on the tail end of the last generation that cares about that. I don't know if my daughter cares about specific brands because of their values or their position or their purpose more than they're popular, they're hip, they provide a product at a reasonable price, and that's all she needs. I don't know. Where do you stand?
I think the first thought that comes to mind as you talk about this is, I think of a lot of things as like decision trees and motivating factors and trigger points and all the things that drive people. And one of the first clear delineation points that comes to mind when we talk about brand for me is needs versus wants. I think when you have a product or something that serves needs, I don't know that brand is as important, but I believe brand is critically important when it serves wants and when you're trying to create desire. Because and what I mean by that is when you're serving something that has needs, it just simply has to be, will it do what I need it to do? Does it solve a problem? Does it do something? You're not so worried about the brand. I mean, maybe there's an element of brand if you're picking between solutions to the same needs. That may be a decision point.
Okay, can I interrupt you right there? I have a point right now to debate on this. Most people would argue they need a car, except if you live in like Manhattan and New York. Most people would argue they need a car. Many people care about the brand of car they buy.
No. Let me be clear. You need a car in general. Most people don't need a car right now, unless your car literally broke down and you can't get work tomorrow. So it's more of a want in the generality of making a driven decision around, I'll seek it out because I want a new car. Need is literally, I have a problem right now. My toilet is broken and it's overflowing, or I have, I literally don't have a pair of shoes. I need to go get it. Like, need to me is like the immediacy of solving a problem. Want is more, it'd be nice to have the nicer car. I'd like the nicer shoes, or I enjoy the jacket. Like, that's how I'm deliberating need versus want, is literally solving something that you have to choose something because it has to be solved for, versus I could live without it because I either have something that's working or I don't need it.
Okay, but that's very, very, you're talking about a very microcosm of like something that I need right now, that I know I have a problem with right now. That's only some percentage of total consumer prompts to buy something.
It does. I mean, when I say now, I just mean in the general way of like, how can I try and describe it? It's need is like, I'm absolutely going to get something that fixes this because I can't just ignore it. Like it is an actual need versus, sure, I want a new car, but I could live without one for 3 more years if I didn't, if I wasn't actively having to go to it.
Okay, well, let's stick with the car analogy, right? I need a car. At some point in time, I need a car. Let's say I don't know, whatever stage of life I'm in. Maybe I'm a teenager getting ready to go to college. I need a car. If I'm the parent, I did a campaign for this in college in ad school for Volkswagen because car brands evoke certain beliefs. And so if I say Volvo, what belief does that evoke?
Well, that's the caveat that I gave is the place that I think brand serves in the making a decision around a need is when I'm choosing between different solutions that solve the same problem. So if I'm selling something that, again, I'm one of the only solutions, then what you're trying to do in marketing is you're trying to just let people know you exist so that when that need arises, they can choose you. If you're in a competitive marketplace, it's when that need arises, why you should choose me versus your other options. But I still think that is very functionally related, right? Does it look nicer? Does it drive faster? Does it have more bells and whistles? Does it have a better warranty? I think it's a very functional than it is what I consider brand is more that eliciting emotion and response. And it's interesting when you said about your daughter, because what I think about is all of the things you said, which is it cool? Does it trend and all of that? That's what I think of as brand, is the thing that creates almost arbitrary desire and want and buy-in and grouping, right? It's your Lululemon. I want it because other people have it. It's a status symbol. It represents something. Why do I want Nikes over anything else? Like, to me, brand is really the inherent value of the brand name and eliciting that value exchange and that response that's outside of the functionality of the product itself. And that becomes where I think the conversation becomes really interesting, where do I want this purse because of its name or because it functionally is a better quality purse than the next one? There's arguments. Some people go after the functionality and the quality. Some people just want the brand name for the status symbol, and it makes you part of a group or a crew. Like that's where the conversation I think gets really interesting. And to me, it's more when I think about brand, it is how does brand, again, either drive your decision making or convince you to take an action that you may not otherwise have an inherent need, or the functionality doesn't necessarily mean that it's what you would choose. It's because of the name associated with it. And again, that tends to be a social construct, right? The idea of brand is because other people are going to see the brand. People are going to see the car that you drive, the shirt you wear, the purse you carry around. I don't know that people would buy brand for something that no one else would ever see. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. I don't know that would be a driver. If you're going to buy a product that is singularly to you and no one else is ever going to see, I don't know that brand is a big driver in that type of decision. So it is possible to not do full funnel. I don't think it is a long-standing and healthy approach to business. I think you could get short-term gains if you're very lucky and you catch a wave or you capture lightning in a bottle. I think it is luck-driven, and I don't think there's any control to it. I don't think it's a way to build a business or have any sustainability. Quite frankly, I think the opposite. I think what you'll see is you'll get brands or companies that get lucky and then they reach a ceiling, and then they're really stuck in a place where they don't know what to do with themselves. They're like, I've reached my pinnacle, and now I've never been forced to spend money to get this before. I've never had to build a marketing funnel. I've never had to do these things. Now I want to grow and expand, and my organic has sort of reached its plateau, and they're at a loss. And they certainly don't like spending the dollars required to sort of make up a lot of ground that they got lucky enough to have to not grind their way into. And so the full funnel, I think, is what gives you the most control over your own destiny and the most data and understanding of how to strategically and in an owned way be able to grow and manage your business in that growth. Everything else, if you don't have full funnel and you don't really understand every stage, is you're just kind of throwing things out there and hoping it sticks and hoping you get lucky. And the problem is sometimes you do get lucky, and that creates confirmation bias where it's like, well, that works, so my thing must be so great that it's better than every other brand that doesn't have to do this. And it almost creates this education of like, I don't need full funnel because I did this thing and it worked. Well, yeah, it worked now. Is it going to work a year from now, 5 years from now? Is it going to work when you 10x it and grow? Like, what's the breaking point? There's no knowledge base around that. But the full funnel, knowing how every single interaction, the journey, the flow, how people consume, the psychology behind things, that's what really gives you a full engine that lets you really say, okay, I can move the needle here, and I can pull this lever, and I can insert this, and I can create my own momentum versus just hoping for a gust of wind.
So a lot of the work that we're really focusing on is on the front end. Obviously, media is a big part of what we execute on, but a lot of the critical thinking is on the front end and communication strategy, thinking about user journeys, thinking about the UI UX, about the creative, about the message, about the audiences. That stuff all sort of needs to, I think, be built to go through a full funnel experience, customer experience, which I think you're lobbying for is still the most valuable long-term business building framework.
Thanks for listening to Contrary to Popular Opinion, where we challenge you to think independently, push the limits, and take uncommon action so you can achieve game-changing results in your business and your life. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.